Hello. This video presents a short introduction to our work, improving video segmentation via dynamic anchor queries. In this work, we focus on improving query-based video segmentation methods to handle video objects' emergence and disappearance more effectively. We observed that the previous SOTA methods tend to underperform when dealing with newly emerging or disappearing objects. Currently, SOTA methods, such as GenVIS, DVIS, MinVIS, etc., model the object's emergence and disappearance as a feature transition between the background and foreground query. Specifically, they model continuously tracking as a feature transition from foreground queries in the last frame to new foreground queries in the current frame, model object emergence as a feature transition from background queries to foreground queries, and model disappearance as a feature transition from foreground queries to background queries. But, a significant transition gap between background and foreground queries poses considerable challenges for newly emerging objects detection and disappearing objects filtering. In this work, we proposed dynamic anchor queries, DAQ, mechanism to address this challenge. We propose a DAQ mechanism to manage the newly emerging or disappearing objects. The DAQ mechanism dynamically generates anchor queries for the emergence and disappearance of objects, thereby shortening the gap and effectively overcoming the challenges. We train the DAQ with emergence and disappearance simulation, EDS, strategy to further unleash the potential of the DAQ mechanism, which is straightforward, efficient, and costless. As a result, we obtained new SOTA performance on 5 benchmarks, including OVIS, YouTube VIS 2019, YouTube VIS 2021, YouTube VIS 2022, and VIP-SEG. We also verified the generalizability and effectiveness of DAQ on multiple propagation-based VIS framework by plugging in DAQ directly into these framework. Specifically, by incorporating with DAQ, we improve the recall ratio of new emergence detection and disappearance filtering by a large margin. We start with the general idea about our dynamic anchor queries. As shown in this figure, unlike previous approaches that treat appearing, disappearing, and tracked objects equally, our method dynamically generates anchor queries for emergence and disappearance based on candidate objects' features to effectively shorten the transition gap. Specifically, we regard all objects segmented in the current frame as potential candidates for newly emerging objects. And we designate all tracked objects as candidates for disappearing objects. These emergence and disappearance anchor queries and the representations of tracked objects are collectively inputted into the tracker to identify the objects of interest in the current frame. Objects identified by the emergence anchor queries are classified as newly appeared, while those pinpointed by the disappearance anchor queries are recognized as having disappeared, prompting their removal. The remaining queries are responsible for tracking objects present across both past and current frames. Now, we introduce how to generate these dynamic anchor queries dynamically. Both DAQs for emergence and disappearance consists of 2 parts, which are query feature and positional embedding. For emergence DAQ, the query feature is a learnable embedding shared by all dynamic anchor queries, and the query positional embedding is obtained using the appearance features of the candidates through simple mask pooling. For disappearance DAQ, we use the candidate's momentum-weighted appearance features as the query positional embedding, and we use initial queries of segmenter as the query feature. Specifically, for each query feature, we match the closest one from the initial queries of the segmenter based on cosine similarity between their features. Here, we introduce how to plug dynamic anchor queries into a tracker. Firstly, there is a simple segmenter which can be instantiated by mask2former. Secondly, we instantiate a propagation-based tracker for continuously tracking and new emerging objects detection, which is named as tracker1. The last, we instantiate a propagation-based tracker for disappearing objects filtering, which is named as tracker2. The tracker1 takes continuously tracked queries, CTQ, and emergence DAQ as inputs and is responsible for tracking continuously appearing and newly emerging objects, while the tracker2 receives disappearance DAQ along with several learnable background embeddings as inputs and identifies disappearing objects in the current frame. Despite introducing an additional tracker, it's worth highlighting that the computational overhead is minimal, constituting less than 2% of the overall computational cost. When using DAQ, it is possible to simulate object emergence and disappearance separately by removing parts of continuously tracked queries CTQ and frame object queries QSEG, respectively. We term this simple yet efficient simulation strategy as emergence and disappearance simulation, EDS. EDS can simulate a large number of object emergence and disappearance cases during training without introducing additional costs, allowing the network to be fully trained and unleashing the potential of DAQ. Here, we integrated DAQ into previous SOTA versus framework DVIS, resulting in our architecture, DVIS-DAQ. The effectiveness of our DAQ design is verified in various settings. Especially, on challenging OVIS benchmark, our DAQ design brings a large improvement on AP under the same background, even compared to the very recent SOTA methods DVIS++. Here is the results on long video benchmark YouTube VIS 2022, and video panoptic segmentation benchmark VIP-SEG. We still receive some improvements on these benchmarks. The effectiveness of detail components of DAQ and EDS is verified through lots of ablation studies. To further substantiate the efficacy of the dynamic attention query, DAQ, we integrated it into an alternative video segmentation framework, DVIS. By incorporating DAQ, we achieved an improvement of 1.7 AP for DVIS. Here, we show some qualitative results, comparison for emergence detection and disappearance filtering. The performance enhancements are highlighted by rectangles in various colors, each color representing an individual video object. For example, objects 5 and 6 are newly emerging objects in frame 5. Our method detects these emergence successfully while DVIS fails. A tiny object 7 is a newly emerging object in frame 6. Our method detects these emergence successfully again while DVIS fails. Objects 1 and 2 are newly emerged in frame 2 and disappeared in frame 5, and reappearing in frame 6. Our methods detect their reappearance successfully while DVIS fails.